Hi Booktube, it's Amy. I'm back again with the next chapter of A London Book Window by James Milne. And today's chapter is called Byron and the Murrays. Would you like to go with me, I in memory, you in fancy, to a literary shrine of London, which everybody does not see, though Mr. John Murray is courtesy itself to the serious pilgrim? It is the drawing room of his house in Albemarle Street by Piccadilly, a place full of memories and associations, with Byron as the centre of them, and he is one of the few English poets who won a European fame at a stride. It was at number 8, St. James Street, down the hill towards St. James Palace, that he awoke one morning to find himself famous. But to be intimate with his fame, we must go to the home of the Murrays in Albemarle Street. You like the thought. Small wonder if you do, for in this drawing room, which the human traffic of London passes without a salute, Byron's journals were burned, so ending in kindly smoke. A document of a new romance and an adventure, of a passion and a glowing prose that the world would have lingered on today, not perhaps always to the exaltation of Byron's good name. You can, in imagination, almost hear its notes of poetry singing up the chimney, now cool in its white marble fireplace, to a blaze that was both historic and generous. It is a long room, and high in the ceiling, as the old London way was, but you hardly notice a detail like this, because it is so full of Byron's treasures which arrest the eye and capture the mind. The Murray drawing room is also notable because Byron and Scott first met here on a date of April in the year of Waterloo, 1815. They came together under the wing of their mutual friend John Murray II, who has sometimes been called Byron's Murray. You may in his journals find the record, "On this day I introduced Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott, and they remained for nearly 2 hours talking to each other." There is even a tradition that they lived downstairs arm in arm, supporting each other, and that is likely enough, for they were both lame men. A story goes, and it may not deserve to go far, that in recent years an American walked into the Murray publishing house, next door to the house, gazed raptly at a twisty iron stair which for trade uses connects its floors, and remarked, "So that is the stair," and was gone before anybody could say him nay. We know it is another stair, an easier and more beautiful one, which we climb to the room of the Murray treasures. Glance around, and you find portraits of Byron, Coleridge, Lockhart, Sir Walter Scott's son-in-law, Moore, Campbell, and other literary worthies who were associated with the Murrays. Byron was not only a dandy, but a sport, and a draught screen, which you will examine with curiosity, is here, a queer testimony to his sportsmanship. It was bought by John Murray II when Byron's effects were sold up to pay his debts, or some of them, for the gay Gordon in him took care that he should never be out of debt. He had the screen made by Gentleman Jackson, who was his trainer, but why he should have set him to such a job there is no explanation. Anyhow, on one side of it there are portraits of the pugilists of Byron's day, Dan Mendoza, Jack Burroton, George Stephenson, Milne, Pierce, Jackson himself, and the rest of the gang. And on the other side, pictures of leading actors and actresses, also of the Byronic time. But Mr. John Murray, John IV, will show you something else with a finer and more intimate touch of the poet. Byron's snuff box, containing a lock of his hair still brown and shot with gold. You handle this box tenderly, for here indeed you are in immediate contact with a genius who will last all down the world. Byron is brought very near too by a little bottle containing hemlock which he sent from Athens to Albemarle Street, where it finds a faithful wardenship. He described it as the direct descendant of the hemlock with which Socrates was poisoned. A paper enwrapping the mouth of the bottle is bleached by time, and so is its fragment of writing by Byron. Even so, you can read that the hemlock contained in this phial was gathered for and by me at Athens, February 1811, B.N. short for Byron. Most precious still is a Bible bound in red morocco, which you are shown because it was Byron's Bible. There is, you must know, an old tale to the effect that Byron, at some thoughtless or angry moment, for he had a temper and could always forget favours, sent John Murray II a Bible wherein he had changed a well-known passage to read, "Now Barbarous was a publisher." Well, Byron's Bible is before you, and you will see that there is no written mark whatever, nothing on the page where the barbarous passage occurs, or indeed anywhere else. The tale had no shadow of fact, so far as Byron and the Murrays were concerned, and let that be definite, for a picturesque lie is hard to kill. If any incident of the sort belongs to the English book world, and perhaps there was a real version, it has no concern with Byron and John Murray II, whose friendship was of a perfect quality. Out of it comes a copy of Byron's English Bards and Scotch Reviewers, on the flyleaf of which he made a notable confession. The binding of this volume, he put down, is considerably too valuable for its contents. Nothing but its being the property of another prevents me from consigning this miserable record of misplaced anger and indiscriminate acrimony to the flames. A second copy of the English Bards and Scotch Reviewers, which had personally been Byron's, is also among the Murray relics, and it bears an apology dated July 14, 1816, on the same matter. The greater part of this satire, you read, I most sincerely wish had never been written, not only on account of the injustice of much of the critical and some of the personal part of it, but the tone and temper are such as I cannot approve. Need it be said that there we have side lights on the attack, which Byron, smarting from criticism by the Edinburgh Review, set, and blaming some of it to Scott, made on him in his English Bards and Scotch Reviewers. If you will look up your Byron, you will come upon this hurt and hurting passage. And thinkest thou, Scott, by vain conceit perchance, on public taste to foist thy stale romance, though Murray with his miller may combine, to yield thy muse just half a crown a line. A footnote to those lines of literary history is that the miller mentioned was the publisher whom John Murray II succeeded when he moved to Albemarle Street from newspaper Fleet Street, where the first Murray of all commenced business. The comment on the lines and on Byron's retraction of them is that from the moment he met Scott in the Murray drawing room, remember, he conceived a warm admiration for him. It should then be clear that John Murray II, in that he found the opportunity, was the beginner of a friendship which came to adorn English literature. How well it regards Byron we see in the fact that no manuscript of any value by him has ever come into the market. The Murray possessions in the way of manuscripts and letters are priceless, and a figure will never be put on them. It is something to own the manuscripts of Scott's Abbot, to have manuscripts by Queen Victoria, Peel, Gladstone, and many a celebrity besides. It is much to have a first folio Shakespeare, an original copy of the Edinburgh Business of Burns, and other such trophies. But the supreme pride of the House of Murray is its Byron manuscripts and letters, which were the making of the definitive Byron published some 20 years ago. A big safe swings open in your wondering gaze, for within it are a dozen pigeonholes crammed with Byron literary remains. Here are manuscripts he wrote, proofs he corrected, endless epistles on his bold, hurrying hand. In his bold, hurrying hand. Note in particular 2 bulky packets, one rich with the letters of Byron to John Murray II, between the years 1811 and 1824, the other freighted with Murray's letters to Byron, for, in those days, correspondence was an art, not merely a business. How privileged one is to handle the large sheets of paper on which Byron wrote, Childe Harold, especially as they directly recall an incident wherein Gladstone and Browning had a part. Browning charged Byron with bad grammar, and in proof of it he quoted the line from Childe Harold, "And dashest him to earth, there let him lay." Said Gladstone, a keen admirer of the poet, if not a man, Byron seems to me to have used the language always as a master, but sometimes as a tyrant. His use of lay, Gladstone put among the tyrannies, but he pointed out that Sterne, in The Sentimental Journey, kept him company, a twin error, not an excuse. As for Byron, one observes that he wrote lay with a special clearness, so showing that he was using it after reflection. At times, his copy, as we may call the manuscript of even a great poet, was very difficult to read, and he corrected much. If he was in England, he called for proof after proof, and each would carry changes back to the printer. When he was abroad, he would send new manuscripts with instructions for their urgent publication. This kind of thing gave good opportunities for such a misprint as is associated with the 182nd stanza of Childe Harold, where the famous lines occur. Thy shores are empires, changed in all save thee. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, what are they? Thy waters washed them power while they are free. Now in several successive editions of Childe Harold, washed them power was printed wasted then, and thus the true rendering of the last line was lost, thanks to the apparent maze of Byron's heavily scored manuscript. It was he himself who discovered the misprint, and in a letter from Greece called attention to it, but somehow it was not corrected until years after his death. And if you have the fortune to own an early edition of Childe Harold, you can still read the mistake there. It is a very wonderful feeling which one has in the Murray drawing room, with the spirit of Byron so close, and so many other British men of literary genius in the atmosphere. Think of William Gifford, the famous editor of the Quarterly, whom Byron called, with every reason, his grand patron and his Magnus Apollo. Probably he valued Gifford and Scott most among all his writing friends, and I stumbled there because there is a somewhat peculiar printing error. We'll see if that can focus, but it seems as though the type shifted in printing, because all is sort of on an angle and the H is lighter and farther over from the rest of the word his. So that's a very interesting thing to come across. And it almost looks as though perhaps when they were printing, either the letters shifted or the ink didn't take, and they came back in later with a small stamp of sorts to sort of correct the error. But yeah, there's that. Probably he valued Gifford and Scott most among all his writing friends, and he had a genius for friendship when he liked. Beside them, no doubt, ranked John Murray II, of whom the poet John Murray the fourth once said to me, I think my grandfather had a perfect worship for Byron, and if I may say so, in all respect, that he sometimes carried it too far. Then I think that Byron had a great regard for my grandfather, but that occasionally he could not, to use a common phrase, refrain from pulling his leg. There was a real affection between them, out and out worship by my grandfather, and on the part of Byron, entire faith and belief in him. There are many letters telling how my grandfather offered Byron all manner of assistance, and others in which the poet would say, don't tempt me, you have already done too much. It is pleasant to end our call at historic Albemarle Street on a personal note like that, so very characteristic of the Murrays in relation to their authors, great and small. So that is Byron and the Murrays. Great little chapter there. That might be one of my favorites in this book so far. But up next, we have an interesting sounding chapter titled A Librarian's Anecdotage.